well, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Lonnie Toro. I'm the business strategist here at Upright Labs. And today we have Aish, who's going to be walking through optimizing your listing strategies. These are going to be some great workflow tips. There are also going to be some best practices. We'll talk about some ways to do some A/B testing and really just hone in on the best ways that you can get the most efficient revenue, efficient revenue, if you can call it that, for your team. So Aish, if you want to give a chance to introduce yourself and kick us off, we're so excited to hear about listing strategies today.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Yes. So I'm Aish. I'm a client services specialist here at Upright. So if you are on a monthly growth support contract, then I might get to work with you. And if not, one of the other specialists who are just as awesome we'll get to talk about things like listing strategies, and we're going to kind of go over some of the learnings and some of the recommendations that we talk about here at Upright. So here's a quick rundown of everything we're going to talk about. We'll first break down a listing strategy, so really understand what the key components of them are, and then get into strategy refinement. So how do we determine which categories should have their own strategy, which groups of items, even if they don't necessarily belong to a specific category, should be broken up, that kind of stuff. And then lastly, we're going to really get into some data-driven improvements. So how do we determine when we should make these changes? What the cadence of that should look like, all of that kind of stuff. All right, so listing strategy anatomy. We've got duration, price structures, and then the type of listing strategy. Are we doing auction or are we doing fixed price? And we'll kind of talk about each of those, starting with duration. So there's a couple key components when we're thinking about listing duration. Inventory space and listing volume is going to be a huge part of that. So how much space do you have is going to really determine how long you can keep those items online. And how much you're listing each day. So how quickly that space is going to get filled up, that's going to be another really important piece of that. And so what we need to figure out is if your listing volume is high, but your inventory space is low, you're going to have to lean towards shorter strategy or shorter durations, because you're going to be creating a lot of new items that are on your store, and you're going to run out of space if those items are not moving relatively quickly. On the flip side, if your listings volume is on the lower end and you have a lot of inventory space, you can start to use some of those longer duration steps. Time to sale is the third piece involved in all of this. So if you have a really fast time to sale, so that's when you first list your item to the amount of time it takes for it to first sell. If that number is relatively low, and we typically look at averages and medians for this, then you can afford to have slightly longer duration listing strategies. Typically what we would recommend is your duration of that first step at least should encompass your entire average time to sale. And the reason for that is because we want as many items to sell in that first step as we can. That's where you're going to get the most interest, typically, and that's when you're going to have the highest price. So that's when you'll get the highest average sale price. And that's why we recommend that. With regards to specific recommendations regarding listing strategy duration, our clients, we have typically seen 5 to 7 day long strategies consistently work really well, and are kind of that Goldilocks zone for a lot of clients, looking at their listing volume and their time to sale and their inventory space. Now, if you have a very specific product mix, this might differ, and that's why that data-driven piece is going to be so important for you. But that is kind of where you should start out with your general strategies. And then in terms of the number of steps, we usually say 3 to 5. The reason for this is after we see, step 4, step 5, at that point, the percent of sales you're getting are going to drop off in a pretty significant way. And that's just going to be because that item's been online enough times, your customer base has likely seen it enough times that if it hasn't sold, by the 3rd, 4th, 5th week, it's likely not going to sell. And there's probably something else that needs to be done with that item. All right, pricing structures. So these are the 3 key components or 3 takeaways we want you to have with regards to pricing. First, we want to start with our highest price. So we don't want to list something at $99 in our first step, And then $200 in our second step, we want to start with that highest price. Again, trying to capture the most number of sales in that first step at that highest price point. Typically, if it hasn't sold in the first step, that is also potentially an indicator that your customer base may not be as interested in that item. So having that descending starting price structure can incentivize a customer who was maybe on the edge when the item was, $19.99, but now that it's $15.99, they're going to go ahead and make that purchase. Second, starting low to incentivize bidding up. We have done analyses across multiple organizations, different product categories, different starting prices, and very consistently, we've noticed a relationship between your sell-through rate and your starting price. Where as starting price starts to come up, your sell-through starts to fall, and that kind of makes sense because you're going to have fewer customers willing to pay that higher price right at the beginning. When we are utilizing auctions, when you start low, you can potentially incentivize customers who placed a bid and now are invested in purchasing that item to pay a higher price because of that bidding up and that bidding war mentality. And then lastly, probably the most important part about making these data-driven decisions for listing strategies is consistent standardization. Once a listing strategy is set up, you should be using it for 9 out of 10, if not more, of your items, because otherwise it's going to be really difficult for you to tell whether the information that you're gathering when those sales start to come in are accurate to whether or not that listing strategy functioned for you. So making sure your listers aren't changing duration or starting price or anything like that at listing, that should be a decision made prior to listing. All right, guidelines for fees. Shipping fees, of course, we've got flat rate and calculated. Typically, we recommend flat rate is better for your smaller items because we can better predict the shipping costs. And they're typically slightly lower end shipping costs. And then calculated tends to be better for your bulky, large items where it's going to have a lot more variability. Other pieces involved with shipping, calculated shipping, you have to make sure that the listers are accurately measuring items. If you aren't doing that, and that's something we've seen with a lot of clients, then you will start to run into places where you're paying more for shipping than you're charging. Alongside accurate measurement, you also need accurate padding entered. So if we're working with a glass vase, you need to enter, potentially more padding than if you were working with books or something that doesn't require as much at shipping. So that kind of measurement of the lister's performance is really important when using calculated. With regards to handling fees, we typically don't recommend handling fees. We have currently conducted some research to indicate that is the better way to go is lower handling fees. If handling fees do need to be utilized, it is better to use them on higher end items where there's a little bit more acceptance, even if there is an additional fee than your lower value items. All right, auction versus fixed price. So auction is when we start an item generally at a lower price point. We set a duration, 5-7 days, and then people can bid on it and that price is going to go up. The benefits of that is you're allowing the market to determine what that product's value is. And that can result in some items that maybe we would have priced at, $100 selling for $1,000. We've seen it happen, especially with collectibles, things like Pokemon cards and vintage items, where it's not always easy to judge the value of that item beforehand. And doing, auction allows you to kind of tap the minds of everyone in your consumer base. The challenges, some items are going to sell for less than their expected value. That's why volume becomes so important when we're working with auction listing strategies. And of course, if you've got impulse purchasers who would like to buy that item right away, you're going to miss out on that when you're using auction. And then fixed price, the benefits, of course, they do allow for that impulse purchase.